Started. Glad to have you here today. Thank you for joining us in this conversation about reimagining the future downtown in the Chicago Loop experience. I'm joined today with my co-presenter, Kiana DeStassi. Kiana is the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer for the Chicago Loop Alliance, which creates, manages, and promotes positive and inclusive programs that accelerate economic recovery and attract people to the Loop, the largest central business district in the United States outside of Midtown Manhattan. And myself, Dave Brose, a principal architect at Gensler, focusing on urban environments and educational environments, and also a full-time professor at the Interior Architecture program at Columbia College in Chicago. Kiana and I have worked together for many years at the Chicago Loop Alliance and share a passion about downtowns. We're both avid bike and scooter commuters. And I will say that I enjoy that because it lets me see the city at a slower pace and allows us to enjoy moments along the way. So with that, we will go ahead and get started. So this is State Street in Chicago. Frank Sinatra made this street pretty famous with his rendition of the 1922 song, State Street, That Great Street, that toddle in town. This is what we looked like before the pandemic. And to put State Street into a global context, it's on par with some of the most premier shopping streets across the globe. Though while many of the high-end brands like Burberry, Gucci, Prada are located a few miles north on Michigan Avenue at Oak Street, State Street has kept a more local shopper feel to it. It's easily accessible by all train lines in the city. State Street is the place where everyday Chicagoans come to shop, centrally located within the business districts and just a few blocks west of Millennium Park. Highlighted in yellow, this street is a commingling of business workers, tourists, and city residents. Millennium Park is the big green blob to the right, with the Lake Michigan just to the right of that on the east. And then bounding us on the north and the west are the Chicago River. In 2019, the Loop was flying high. Office vacancies were at an all-time low. Tourism had pegged a new record, and the Loop was the fastest growing neighborhood in the city of Chicago as residents wanted to take in the culture, the nature, and the work of their central business district. But when the pandemic hit, the 400,000 daily workers, the 50,000 college students, the 40,000 residents all just seemed to disappear. And this no doubt looked like many of your previous bustling downtown streets during 2020. Add to that the social justice reckoning that sparked protests and violence. These were the last images seen by many of those former daily occupants. And when they did not come downtown for weeks, months, years, these isolated incidents were left in their memory with fear. The Loop Alliance, with a partnership with local artists, came through and painted each one of the boarded up storefronts throughout the Loop, so that the damage that had been done could contribute to a positive image rather than just plain plywood. And as the residents and urban occupants gained confidence with the pandemic, State Street was the perfect place for gathering, just as before the pandemic. So while the images on the right were of emptiness and destruction, the image of the left is on hope, and the future is bright with the right vision and mindset. While the non-essential office workers left the city, there were several other of these communities that stayed. Chicago is known as America's urban campus. There are over 18 universities located in the Loop, with over 50,000 students attending class on a weekly basis. When you broaden that to the entire city of Chicago, there's over 200,000 students throughout the city in the university system. For the most part, these students did not leave the city. They were still living downtown through the pandemic. And the map on the right shows, with the big circles, the universities, and the small dots, all the amenities that make the Loop potentially one of the largest college towns in the world. So a quick update on my personal journey. In my 22nd year at a large architectural firm, I had the opportunity to teach in the Interior Architecture program at Columbia College, Chicago, an urban design school located in the South Loop of Chicago. These students use every corner of their city as their campus. And they're shown here with our required reading material by Bruce Mau, his newest MC24 book, The 24 Principles of Massive Change. Here you can see the author in the center of the photo. He came to speak with the students, and together with the design studio, these students realized that they could use their design vision to paint a picture of a better future for when the downtown reopened after 2 years of pandemic. Success would not be measured by going back to where we were, But with our eyes open wider, we needed to create a downtown that is where we want to and need to go. So these 30 design students focused their first in-person post-pandemic design studio, their final capstone studio, on reimagining our downtowns with visions for an inclusive downtown. You can follow this QR code to see the nearly 200-page book that the studio produced. The students tackled the problem as with any design problem, first looking at precedent and historical research on the district, then taking a very critical look at the street today, and finally looking at case studies of peer types of urban spaces across the world. Very brief history. Before the Chicago fire, literally 2 days before the Chicago fire, the Palmer House Hotel, shown in the center photo, opened. The photo on the right is the corner of State and Madison, once called the busiest intersection of the world. In the 1980s, to prevent a suburban exodus, the once thriving street was turned into a bus mall, and to no fanfare and quick deterioration, only to be converted back to a thorough street a few years later. The students looked at other downtowns as points of reference too, discovering a common thread in all of their research was a district of not just singular function like work, but one that had a multitude of uses: tourism, residential, education. The list goes on. Another common thread was that the districts were socio-economically diverse. Districts that could attract residents of all income levels with all diversity of culture of background. Those are the ones that tended to be the most successful in the students' eyes. So then we got the design portion of our studio. There were 4 sites identified on State Street. State Street is the white line in between the 4 red boxes. Each student chose one and then to do their project on, and then each student was able to pick their intervention, pick the project that they think would be the changing moment in the street. Spoiler alert, the 30 different projects proposed by the students look nothing like what is on the street today. They're not proposing another shoe store or clothing store, but rather each student in their project had a very social justice, equitable focus to it. And I'll take a few moments to just highlight some of them now. The project in the center is Interactive Arts Hub. This is one of several similar types of projects that look to create activity spaces and incubators. Another student had come up with a small business incubator center where businesses from all corners of the city could come to downtown and not only sell their product, but also have mentoring and tutoring that goes along with offering, giving these small businesses a chance to scale. AR Chicago on the left was an example of a student that had a vision to use augmented reality to allow tourists in the central business district to teleport themselves to all 77 neighborhoods in all corners of the city. A chance to get that first taste of what a city is like without having to actually travel there. The Chicago Sustainable Arts Hub took over an abandoned CTA station in below State Street and turned it into an exchange, a place where artists could come and exchange materials that they no longer needed and also work on their craft. Vivid was a deft community center. Fostered was a center that focused on foster parents and the parents' ability to continue working in the loop while dropping their kids off for a daycare center with like people that had also been foster kids. What's interesting is when the students had begun to think of their topics, they took time to present them to me. And I would say probably 3/4 of these students at some point looked at me and said, "Are you sure this belongs in downtown Chicago?" And collectively as a class, we realized that these future leaders, these students that have graduated and are now working in your companies, have a vision of a downtown that's very different. And they deserve to be listened to. Because if you were to stitch a downtown together of all of these different types of projects, these looking at cultural dining immersion, a home for refugee and immigrants, a place for inclusion of accelerating diversity within our design profession. These are all topics or spaces that have been pushed to the fringes of our city and cleansed from our downtowns And the question is, if they are downtown, what does our city become? South Asian fast fashion, kind of realizing that there's a place to sell it, but is there a way for it to be more of a living wage? A young women's leadership academy. When you add all of these together, it paints a pretty amazing picture of what our future leaders see our downtowns needing to be. The QR code is again here on the page. I invite you to take a look at it. That will take you to a digital version of the book. And please, during the Q&A, add comments and commentary. We've done a very quick overview as far as what the students have produced this semester, but it's meant to be the start of a conversation and a dialogue. So I thank you for your time today. With that, I'll pass it to Kiana.
Thank you, David. That is super inspiring and really aligns with a lot of the things that I'll be talking about today. It's so great to see the future leaders of our downtowns with such big visions, and the sort of things that they're thinking about really align with what we at Chicago Loop Alliance have identified as sort of the reimagining of downtowns, which is our topic today. So one moment, here we go. Can you see everything all right, David?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. All right, so today we're talking about reimagining the future downtown. So I have no crystal ball. I know none of us do. I don't know exactly what the future of all our downtowns are, but at Chicago Loop Alliance, we have found really 5 pillars of what we perceive what we're working on right now in terms of what are our goals, and the programs that we're working on sort of fit into 5 different slots. And a lot of this really aligns with some of the work that David just spoke of and what his students, the future leaders of our downtowns, are seeing in the future of our great cities. So I'm going to go through those 5 tenets with you. The first is, maybe not as a big surprise to all and very much in line with what David was saying, the putting equity and inclusion first. So in everything that we're doing in our downtowns and our organizations and in our lives, we are seeing and hoping that equity and inclusion is the first pillar of what we're talking about. And our future leaders, as David mentioned, definitely see this as well. And that is very inspiring. For Chicago, I could go on with many, many examples of how our downtowns and organizations and companies and cities are doing this. And hopefully there will be more and more. We always feel like it is not enough. But I'll very briefly talk about an initiative from Chicago Loop Alliance. We, during the pandemic, kind of renamed and rebranded our neighborhood as Everyone's Neighborhood. It really was always a diverse neighborhood where everyone came to work and play, but we really wanted to be intentional about it not just being a diverse place, but being an equitable and inclusive place where everyone feels welcomed and can have the same access to resources and privileges in our downtown, which is the Loop. So the Loop, as David was mentioning, is the central business district in the city of Chicago, but we also have much more than that, which we'll talk about in a second. So the objective of this campaign was to unite and promote the Loop community through equity and inclusion downtown. And, you know, when we were all, many of us were quarantined or away from our loved ones and our public spaces during the pandemic, we all realized that home really wasn't just about the place we sleep, but about the places we go, the people we see, the restaurants, the shops, the offices, the schools, the theaters, parks, and the streets that we experience together. So we really wanted to use this campaign as sort of a rallying cry to bring people back home to the Loop, which we consider everyone's neighborhood outside the neighborhoods they might live. And it is also a neighborhood where people do live. There is a large residential community in the Loop in the city of Chicago. So core components of Chicago Loop Alliance's mission are inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. And we've been working on that internally as an organization as well, but also looking to see how that reflects to the Loop as a whole and our city as a whole. If you're interested in more on our efforts and our what we call our IDEA committee, you can find more information about that at loopchicago.com/IDEA. Our main pillars of this program are to look at community and workforce as we work through this equitable and inclusive goal, these equitable and inclusive goals. So that's the first one, equity and inclusion first. The second that we've been working on here at CLA at Chicago Loop Alliance is shaping the narrative through data. So as David mentioned, for many of us, and especially here in the city of Chicago, the perception of what was happening downtown really changed during the pandemic in the last couple of years, because people weren't necessarily experiencing our downtowns in person as much as they did pre-pandemic. So someone who potentially was coming down to work in the Loop every day might hear a negative story about crime or violence in a city, but not let that change their whole perception of what the downtown is. But now when people are spending less time downtown, less time coming to work, perhaps in traditional offices, the media and these isolated incidents that are receiving extensive coverage in the media are maybe all that they're seeing of downtown. So we really took it upon ourselves to shape that narrative. So in doing that, we really used data, and we're continuing to use data. Every month we are producing a report about what is happening in our downtown to really show the recovery that the city of Chicago is experiencing. On your screen here, you can see there is a lot of lines. We track pedestrians, office occupancy, parking, hotel occupancy, our transit, and also the COVID-19 rate to see how that is affecting the recovery. As you can see, it is going up and up and up. We are recovering. And I'll point out a few things a little bit later, but we'll get back to this chart. But this is really key to getting positive media coverage on what's going on downtown. So that has been very successful for Chicago Loop Alliance, having that data that we report every month. And then we are the trusted resource for our media in downtown Chicago and the city of Chicago and nationally. So we've been getting lots of requests for interviews by these local and national outlets. And that is receiving, as you can see on the right, a lot of media coverage, over 1.4 billion media impressions for Chicago Loop Alliance, which is a small not-for-profit organization in 2021, and over 1,000 clips mentioning CLA and 4.1 million in earned media coverage. So this is really talking about the value of putting your attention into PR and communications with shaping this narrative and talking to the media directly, instead of letting other people tell the story of your downtown when we are really the experts that are here every day. So the third pillar that we are working on here at Chicago Loop Alliance, and this has been a big one for us this last year and a half, is promoting positive experiences and perceptions. So if people aren't coming downtown every day to work in the most traditional way that they used to before, we needed to find new ways to bring people downtown and have them have a positive experience with their city and sort of fall in love with it again. And then they can go back home and think of that good positive time that they had, and maybe not the isolated media incidents that's receiving extensive coverage. So we produced a program called Sundays on State that we just launched last year for the first time as part of the economic recovery. And we actually just today announced the full lineup for this Sundays programs this summer. So literally that's just went out to the media as we're speaking. So it's a big day here at Chicago Loop Alliance. This program was lauded very heavily. It was called the best new event of the year by an important local media outlet and named one of 8 great spots in Chicago to hit while the weather is hot by the New York Times, our big national newspaper here in Chicago. And what we did was we took that most iconic street in the city that David was talking about, we shut it down, and we shut it down to traffic, and we opened it up as an open street. It was like it's an interactive citywide block party where it was free. People could come from every neighborhood and beyond to safely enjoy arts, culture, active recreation, shopping, and you'll see a little bit more in a second. So I'm going to play a quick video for you. Apologies if the audio is slightly delayed, but there are captions. So here we go.
Sundays on State has been a marvelous celebration of the human experience in Chicago. You know, it really makes the downtown area everyone's neighborhood.
About 10 years ago, they never did something like this. This was wonderful. I love it.
It's great that you brought the stage.
really livening things up downtown. I think it's bringing more people to the heart of Chicago, which is a downtown area, and letting people know that we're open and that we're doing great. The best thing about Sundays on State is the diverse community that it has created. Being here has allowed us to hit up a demographic that we normally would not hit. When not only just starting my business, but it's also giving me so much exposure because of Chicago Loop Alliance and this Sunday on State. New York Fashion Week found me, and I fly out Friday to go sponsor it.
So that is a little taste of what, oops, excuse me, sorry, one second, what Sundays on State looked like on the street. So our main goals of this event, which were met and exceeded, were one, to accelerate the economic recovery, which definitely happened. We had well over $12 million of direct economic impact reported, and that's probably actually modest in terms of the actual impact that was achieved. Over 500,000 people from every single neighborhood in the city of Chicago and beyond attended this event, which was really an important key goal for us because especially in the city of Chicago, there tends to be a lot of racial segregation and class segregation in the city, and we brought people from every single corner and beyond. And there were no reports of violent crime at these events, which was something that we've been really, as in terms of public perception, struggling with, that people felt like it was not safe downtown. And people were able to enjoy these full days, 8 different Sundays, and there was no single report of violent crime to Chicago Loop Alliance. And then really to bring joy back to Chicagoans. And that fourth point that I mentioned was really about working towards public perception, which is what this whole pillar is about, right? Shaping people's public perception, having them have a positive experience in our downtowns. As you see on the right, people who attended said that it positively affected their feelings about the Loop. They said they would come again. They visited a local business while they were there. So all of the things we were hoping for, which is why we're doing it again this year. So just a quick look at what this looked like. Like I said, there was arts and culture on the street. This is more examples of that. Active recreation, physical things people could do out on the street with their children and families. Shopping is a main core component, both for our main retailers on the street and for independent small entrepreneur businesses that set up on the street. And of course, food and drink, which there was plenty of. And then this is really important, our pedestrian impact for this event. So as you can see, this dotted line is 2019 pedestrian levels on State Street. Up here is before the pandemic. In 2019, we were having one of our best years ever. Of course, this is after the pandemic's impact here in the United States. And we were slowly working our way back up. Now this particular chart stops in September of 2021. So we are actually far past this at this point. We're a little bit more up here in terms of recovery, but these yellow stars are what the dates that Sundays on State brought people back to the Loop and to State Street. So we actually met 2019 levels and sometimes exceeded them during those events, which was a major goal for the event. And then bringing people from all over the city, which I told you about was a very important goal, and bringing people back into the Loop who hadn't been in a long time. So there were people who hadn't been, some people had been in the last few weeks or months, but many hadn't been for many months or even years. And this was an event, free event that gave them a positive reason to come downtown. 69% of the activations came from underrepresented businesses. So this back to that equity and inclusion piece that both David and I were talking about, women-owned and minority-owned businesses were a core component of that. And there was a lot of overlap in other categories. So we also had veteran-owned businesses, LGBT-owned businesses, and disability-owned businesses. We just announced today that our activations for Sundays on State for 2022 for this summer are going to have 79% of our activations from underrepresented businesses. So we're hoping to meet and exceed the level of what we represented on the street last year. So a little bit about the marketing exposure, because that's what I do at Chicago Loop Alliance. And I think a really core strategy, important component of the strategy, was that the marketing and exposure for Sundays on State was really intentionally created to reach all of Chicago and beyond. And we created a very unique strategy for this that has won us some recognition and awards. So PR Week Awards, which is a US awards that, I mean, the people who are recognized in this are the big corporate companies: Amazon, PepsiCo, Budweiser, Pfizer, very large corporate companies with large agencies and whole teams to do advertising. We were recognized alongside them for our marketing strategy for this event. And the International Downtown Association is going to be recognizing us this year for their Downtown Achievement Awards for this event as well. And that strategy was about a purposely diverse, inclusive, and expansive strategy that could reach all communities through locally authentic sources. So it is very easy to take marketing funds and put them all towards large digital companies like Google, like Meta. We did not do that with this well, we did do that. We did have some funds go to those companies, but the majority of this campaign was really about using local, minority-owned, and minority-focused media outlets so that we were investing in our own community and not using these funds to go out elsewhere. And so that we could then reach audiences as diverse as the city itself, including those without digital access and including those who may have digital access but do not choose what they are going to do in their free time based on what Google or Facebook tells them to do. So we were able to create these key partnerships with community and media outlets to further extend the campaign's reach and reach a larger group of people. So the budget that we originally had, because of the marketing partnerships we created, which took a lot of time, made over 3.5 times the scope of the original budget. And when you include earned media, over 13 times the original budget, marketing budget, with the efforts we put in there, which if you came to this event, you could feel what that did. If we just did digital advertising, we would have still gotten a lot of people, but it wouldn't have felt like that true community event where every single corner from the city was there. And as you can see on the right, that really paid off with our impressions that were gained from the event and the media marketing value of almost $2.5 million. Okay, so that's enough about Sundays on State. I love that program. I could talk about it all day, but we also do this other cool program called Activate, which we've been doing for many years. It is award-winning as well. And this is more of a nighttime, a little bit older crowd, not as family friendly, but kids still come. I brought my 4-year-old once. I guess he was 2 then. I'm a bad mom. For this is a free celebration of arts and culture. So we activate underutilized spaces, we accelerate the economic recovery, we unite the community. It enhances public perception, which is the key of this component. And there's a bit of a cool factor for this event. So I'll show you a quick video of that event as well. This one's fast, I promise. So this event hasn't happened yet this year. It is going to be this next Thursday, June 30th, one night only. We'll be doing our Activate Again event. So again, that is about promoting positive experiences and perceptions downtown, giving people a reason to come back. And then the fourth pillar is addressing safety concerns. So I mentioned that, and David mentioned that there are these people concerned about how safe people are in the city of Chicago or many of our downtowns. I'm interested to hear from folks on the call who else is experiencing those sort of battles with public perception. So we are really addressing those safety concerns head on here at Chicago Loop Alliance. We have a program, and maybe several of you have programs like this as well. I know it's a very popular thing, but our Chicago Loop Alliance ambassadors are clean and safe safety teams that we have out on the loop. We've had them on State Street for many years. They do many things. They greet guests, they help with directions, they actually physically clean street sidewalks and anything that's on the street, clean graffiti. They help people who might need social services or people experiencing homelessness. They also are trained in de-escalation tactics, so they can hopefully de-escalate negative situations when they might occur. And they also act as a visual deterrent for some of those circumstances. So we actually find that if one of our local businesses is having some sort of issue or some sort of negative interchange with someone, even just the presence of our ambassadors walking by, these are unarmed individuals individuals, they often that can kind of calm down and de-escalate a situation and be a deterrent to something getting worse. So this is really about this program has been so popular in Chicago that some of our neighboring districts are now replicating it. And the city of Chicago has just announced a large fund and programming to have these programs all over the city of Chicago so that they have ambassadors like we have here in the Loop in other areas as well. We know this is not the only answer to the solution of safety. There are really many components to what is a very large problem. And one of them we also see is about community investment, in investing in other areas of our city that might not have as many resources or privileges, and where a lot of these issues might be starting in terms of people being underinvested in for years and communities not receiving what they need in order to be safe and prosper, and how that affects every aspect of our city. So community investment is really a big core component of this as well. And then the fifth component, so embracing downtown as more than just office. A lot of us in these central business districts like the Loop are thinking about, getting that office worker back. And we need to think about, like David was talking about, how the future of our downtown is changing and how things might not be back just the way they were before. So we are still very focused on, of course, getting office workers back, and that is happening. But there are also other things we're looking at as well. So we recently teamed up with some of our local organizations, including World Business Chicago and BOMA and other companies, for this Chicago Returns campaign, where we literally greeted people coming off the train like they were running a marathon and said, "You've got this," and held a bunch of funny signs, encouraging people to come back and enjoy their time downtown and smile a little. And we also created a back to office toolkit, which you can find on our website, that gives people, what happy hours are open, what has changed on public transit, what new businesses are downtown that weren't here when you maybe left 2 years ago. So we are still very focused on that core office worker and central business district component. However, that is not all of the future of our downtowns, and it really never was, at least not here in the Loop. There's always been a lot going on in our district, and it's really about focusing on that. So as you can see in this graph I showed earlier, we're trying to recover in all of these aspects, right? This orange line is pedestrians in our downtown. And as you can see, they have come pretty close to 2019 levels in some cases. And there were certain days, this data is weekly, but there were certain days where we either even met or exceeded 2019 levels in the Loop, like Sundays on State that I mentioned, which would have been back here. There were days we met it, and there have been other days since then. But so right now we're hovering around 70 to 80% pedestrian levels downtown compared to 2019. But if you look at office occupancy, that is this blue line here. We're definitely starting, it was the dip of, we had a big surge in January in this area. But after that, we've been coming back, and I can't wait to see this month's data because it is bustling down here. There are tons of people out. So I imagine all of these numbers are gonna spike up a bit more in June. This data is from May. But as you can see, office occupancy is only 43% last month. And our pedestrian occupancy on the street was around 70%. So there's a lot going on here that is not office leading the recovery of our downtowns. And that is what we want to also look at in terms of reimagining our future, that we do not think of our central business districts as just that, as central business districts. They are much more than that. And that includes residential. Our residential folks have been here all along and the whole time. Arts and culture, we have seen definitely people coming to our downtowns and central business districts for the arts and culture in these areas. We have a large theater community, very important and large theaters downtown that attract tens of thousands of people to the Loop every single weekend. There's leisure, there's education, like David mentioned. We have lots of campuses and students and faculty and staff here. Tourism is huge for the city of Chicago. We have several million people in the city. And if you include the surrounding areas, maybe 7 million people. But our tourist numbers before the pandemic were 50 to 60 million people per year. So tourism is really a key of where you're going to get a large amount of people coming to downtown. Parks, dining, beautifying our public areas, micromobility, like David mentioned, scooters, bikes, really finding different ways to get people to move downtown and make it a more desirable atmosphere, maybe not so clogged with just cars and other means of transit. Experiential experiences, we're seeing a lot of experiential museums and things like that happening. And retail is not dead, it is different. And we still see that as a component as to why people are coming downtown. People are still coming to State Street, maybe in different ways and in different numbers, to experience physical shopping on the street. And maybe that's different than what it used to be. And like David said, we're going to reimagine what that looks like. Maybe other things can be in those places as well. So it's not just anything should not just be a full retail corridor or just a complete office corridor. We're re-looking at what the multi-use of those areas are. So these are all the kind of areas that we'd say for the reimagining of downtown to really be investing in, as well as office. Office is still a core component. We're coming into the office 3 days a week here at Chicago Loop Alliance. I love connecting with people and being actually physically in the office and in downtown, feeling that energy and excitement, but it's not the only component of the future of downtowns. So the 5 pillars were equity and inclusion first, shaping that narrative through data, promoting positive experiences and perceptions through those programs I mentioned, like Sundays on State, like Activate, address, and I'm interested to hear what you all might be doing in your districts for those types of positive experiences, addressing the safety concerns that I'm interested in, also hearing what other districts are experiencing in that and how which of these types of situations might be unique to the United States or unique to the city of Chicago, and what else you all are experiencing. And then embracing downtown is far more than just office. So all those other components that we just reviewed. So that is all I have to say. Thank you so much for your time. If you would like to reach out, please feel free to reach out to me. My information is there. David, I'll hand it back to you.
Great, thanks, Kiana. And then there was a question in the chat about the video. So I gave a link to the Chicago Loop Alliance website in the chat that has that information, and the video is there. It's a tremendous kind of activation of the loop, and you really have to. It's almost like if you look back, if you look at the street today and say, well, was it really a big deal? Remember that was being planned during the pandemic of 2020 to be rolled out, and during 2021 when we didn't know if it was even safe to be outside next to people, and the overwhelming support that came from it. And we're talking to Loop Alliance and other kind of urbanophiles, people that love the city. We realized that when they saw those images on the TV, and Kiana said it really well, that they didn't have the daily reassurances that it was still good, that that was just what they saw and that got stuck in their memory. We found that we were hosting kind of visioning sessions with various groups as far as how to reactivate our downtown and what does our downtown want to become after the pandemic. And we've actually felt that people had fallen out of love with the city. And that's such a tragic thing to experience. And so the Sundays on State was born for that very reason. It was just to bring, I loved how Kiana put it, to bring joy back, and to let people fall back in love with the city. And based on the exit interviews that we got from that, it was pretty compelling that it occurred. So there were a couple questions that came in, one of which is, did students incorporate outdoor spaces? Absolutely. I will tell you a common thread that ran through their projects was that the indoor, that line was blurred between the sidewalk experience and the indoor experience on most of their projects. Part of that could be an awakening of the pandemic and wanting more kind of fresh air, but part of that too is just big windows that open up that allow kind of that transparency between the street. So the outdoors was definitely incorporated within their projects. The other question was, will any of these projects be built? So the funny thing about a student project is that it kind of has the world as its opportunity. And in my opinion, there were 2 goals of this semester for my students. The first was instill a sense of civic pride and purpose to these students. There's a couple of them on the call today, and they can probably recite it with me. They will get commissions for work, absolutely. But what they do with those commissions and how they stretch their clients beyond the question at hand is something that we really talked about a lot. And so while you might be hired to design a retail space on State Street, they always look at the context beyond the space that they're designing and what impact can they have. And this will only amplify through their career. The second goal that we had was to use their opportunity or their ability as a graphic-minded individual to paint a better future to inspire others. So one particular project, I want to talk about inspiration, because I think inspiration brings inspiration. So one of the projects that the students researched in great depth was Sundays on State Street. And one of the students loved the statistic that there was one of these vendors last summer, Kiana, that wanted to open up a store on State Street. Like they had so much success that they went into one of the retail centers and wanted to open up a store. So this one particular student created a business incubator because of the success of Sundays on State Street. So is there a chance that these 40 or 50 vendors that will be on the street this summer, that a couple of them feel like they can scale their business and there's a place on the street that they're familiar with to grow? Another student had created the Riff Hotel and Bar, was a blues hotel to take over part of the space in the Palmer House, which is a nearly 2,000 bed hotel, dividing it into different concepts. By doing presentations like this, the hope is that someone at the Palmer House sees it and they're like, that's a pretty good idea. And will the student ever get credit for it? Potentially. But our job, I believe, is to just kind of spark ideas and to get students to kind of challenge the status quo. Because left to their own devices, I think a lot of these building owners hire retail brokers to sell retail space. And I think what we identified here is that they might need to stretch their definition of what typically occupies the first floor in a diverse downtown business district. It's not more retail, it's not more office. Perhaps it's some of these opportunities for destination that got pushed to the sides of our city so long ago. So Kiana, I see a question in here. Can you discuss a bit more about how you're able to reach out to the Black and the Brown communities with your marketing campaign?
Sure. So that was really about, lots of ways, really being intentional and inclusive about that being a goal from the beginning. So getting back to that, I was saying, if you just go with just straight digital marketing, there are ways to be able to kind of target folks and do different demographics, but really reaching out and creating core community partnerships and relationships and vendors who are in Black and Brown communities. So an important component of Sundays on State is investing in local media, including minority-owned media, specifically Black and Latinx for the city of Chicago owned and run media outlets, so that people are being invited by trusted pillars in their own community, in their own language. So when I was building the marketing plan for this, we worked with a fantastic ad agency. I can't say enough about Allied Global Marketing, who helped us a little bit with this a lot last year and even more this year for Sundays on State. And from the beginning, they were kind of giving recommendations like they usually do to, where to buy and what to do. And I was just really going back to that I really want to invest in these local media outlets, not just for the diversity and inclusion aspect of it, but also to invest in local media and local journalism, which I think is something very important in our neighborhoods in this country. So we put our dollars there. We actually, we're investing in those communities and creating partnerships so that people were being reached by local community members and outlets that they trusted. So it wasn't just these multinational companies, or it wasn't just the big media outlets downtown, but you were kind of hearing about it everywhere. And that takes a lot of more work. It is very easy to do. I could make a digital campaign on Google and throw tons of money at it and get bodies, but to independently work with all these individual media outlets, it's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time. And there were times when I was like, what am I doing? This is crazy. This is way harder, but it was intentional. And when you were on the street, you felt that it was this place where everyone felt welcome and invited by trusted pillars of their own community.
Can I just, it's always fun in life when you hear where someone else was when an experience happened. So I'm also on the board of the Chicago Loop Alliance, and Kiana was making a presentation to the board about the success of Sundays on State Street. And she started out with the fact that residents from all neighborhoods in the city of Chicago attended, the percentage of minority and women business owned that participated in the street, and all that was just amazing. And that is what we believe the city of Chicago is about. And so when we see it amplified in an event that we produce like this, it just makes your heart flutter. Where I lost my breath was when Kiana described her marketing campaign. And it was because I was on a South Side neighborhood and I saw a CTA bus go by with the Sundays on State Street advertisement on it. And it was just so unexpected But you understand then how strategic that marketing campaign was that yielded the results that we're all so proud of and amplified the reality of the power of this city when we all come together. And when you go back to understand that in those 8 events, there were no significant security issues reported, it just realizes that we're a good society, we're a good city, and organizations like the Loop Alliance and your organization around the globe has the responsibility. We're not just pumping out the positives, we're pumping out the reality. And I have to commend Kiana and her whole team, because I was, as a board member, was pretty blown away by that.
Thank you, David.
Let's see, there was a question, as an architect, can you speak about the future of the office space? Off topic, but would be glad to give an opinion on that. So I think the pandemic opened up people's eyes to the number of hours and seconds in a day of their life. And the commuting, there's a couple catchphrases that I've seen that the office has to shift from an obligation to a destination. So when Kiana talked about wanting to come into the office 3 days a week, it's because she values that camaraderie. But for those other 2 days a week, she's going to stuff in with focus activity that she has no reason to come to the office for. And I think that phrasing of switching from an obligation, you've hired me as a full-time employee, I'm going to be in your office for 60 hours of work a week, plus additional beyond that, to a destination, I think changes the pressure on the design of our offices and more importantly, the design of our cities. So the Alley activates an interesting project and party that we throw. And to some extent, part of the way that we saw Sundays on State Street was just to welcome people back to the city. And I think the Activate has an opportunity to celebrate the people that have come back to the city. And so I think the programming can begin to change as we begin to get, we're up to almost 50% of office occupants. I think that we can begin to change our programming to celebrate those 50 people, because I don't know if the corporations are going to be able to get it over 50% on a regular basis if organizations like the Loop Alliance and yours across the globe don't do some additional programming to welcome them back. So Kiana, let me ask you a question here. From your perspective, how can Sundays on State Street inform the future planning of State Street or downtowns? I actually found it very interesting. The photograph you showed, and I didn't notice it until you were talking, had big road closed signs. And I almost think we should get rid of the road closed signs and say open for pedestrians, right? Like just flip the script on that. So what do you think? You've seen the success of Sundays on State. I think we all were worried that we were going to throw a party and no one was going to come. So if you had to design State Street over or any of these business districts across the globe, what would you do differently now that you see what Sundays on State Street can do?
Great. Well, yeah, I think there's a lot of experience, what we learned as a city from this event, and also just personally, some of my own personal preferences about how the future of downtowns might look. I definitely think the getting away from that core focus of automobiles being at least in the United States. I know that this is a little bit more further along in many of the places that are listening and watching this around the globe. We envy you for those of you who are a little further along with public space and transit. But in the United States, a lot of our core downtowns are very focused on automobiles first mentalities. And Sundays on State really opened up. We're going to make this a place where people are going to come by foot or by bike or maybe they'll be dropped off by a car, but they're not going to be driving down State Street, and how much we could still really revitalize that corridor. There were more people there than any other day of that week or month, or so people still will get places even if they can't drive a car through it. That was really inspiring to see. I think that ties back to looking at what we were looking about in other sectors of how we can focus on micromobility and transit and other uses of core corridors. I've been having a discussion lately with some folks around here. Scooters have just been sort of allowed more broadly here in Chicago. This has been a process they've been working on for several years to integrate electronic scooters downtown. And the things that people say about their irritation with scooters is everyone has different opinions about scooters. And if you've ridden one, you might feel differently. But the visual of seeing a scooter somewhere like totally freaks people out if a scooter is somewhere in a public space. But we see cars visually in public spaces all the time, sitting in places, and just kind of the visual distraction and physical distraction. Cars are on the street, and bikes as well. Bikes are everywhere. They actually take up more of a physical space than a scooter, but we're just not used to scooters. So when people change their perception, when someone something new and an innovation comes in, your first reaction, and I think it's human instinct, is, oh, that's new, I don't know, you're not used to operating with them, so you don't know how fast people are going or how they can manipulate. It's fine, it's fair, but the actual visual disturbance of a scooter is actually less than a bike or a car, and where it might sit on the street. So I see bikes all over the place in the city of Chicago, and no one is going like, oh my gosh, can you see look out that bike parking, when an electronic scooter actually takes up less space. So I think that this is sort of off topic, but just kind of doing something different in that space. At Sundays on State, you saw a different use of that space, and people started thinking, well, maybe something different can be here. The other key component, I think, of what Sundays on State informed the possible use of State Street is getting back to what you said, David, is these business owners came down here. They're not one of these big, a lot of our stores on State Street are big national corporations, and they're just small mom and pop local entrepreneurs, artists, and small businesses. And there was demand for their product. There were people selling out. There were people making capital that they could use to expand their business. I mean, people were thrilled about the responses they were getting. And why can't those businesses be on State Street or the major corridors of all your downtowns? It really is an intentional, people are going to have to intentionally work to make that happen. We are going to need, like you said, David, retail brokers who are thinking about different things, opening retail space up to possibly different uses. Like you said, I love the creative ideas your students had, but also looking at non-traditional folks that they don't usually maybe give out leases to, or lessening the cost of what their leases are for certain spaces that are uninhabited right now, and not just looking at like large multiple corporations to trust with lease space. So I really think investing in those, specifically the artists and the small businesses that are at Sundays on State, I would hope and love, and at Chicago Loop Alliance, we keep trying to find ways to make this happen. It's going to take time to find ways to give permanent brick and mortar space or even pop-up space on our major corridors. And there are places that are having that success. So it is definitely possible, and a new inclusive use of downtown.
The ironicness of this presentation isn't lost on me that my students researched the bus mall when we closed the street and what an abysmal failure it was. But yet we're also proclaiming when we closed the street last year, what an amazing success it was. I think the big difference between the two is when the bus mall was created a few decades ago, it was seen as a regional attraction. And I think what the pandemic opened up, as many of your downtowns or neighborhoods closed streets for restaurants to have outdoor seating, is that when you close a street like this, it becomes a local attraction. And so while the Loop is unique because we have tourists, so the demographic numbers are slightly skewed, I do wonder, many of those, from 20 different states or whatever that number was, Kiana, I bet a lot of them were hotel residents, right? They were in a hotel and they just happened to be from Nebraska. And so I think that there's a very big difference. So the question was put, can you see eliminating or reducing auto lanes to encourage larger sidewalks and public space? I think there is a personal opinion. I think there's value to the festival. I think there's value to the pop-up, and that the expectation of the street is that it will probably always be some sort of automobile focus. But to have these kind of temporary pop-ups, I think create excitement, anticipation, and a unique draw to the downtowns.
And if I may add,
yeah.
Oh, sorry, David.
Well, I think our downtowns are unique in memory creation. So the reason why the Activates were so successful is that we threw a party in an alley. Like, whoever would have thrown a party in an alley? And there's no mirrored experience anywhere around the world, especially in what we typically see as our competition, which is the suburbs, to create experience and memory like that. And so in my opinion, what we do in downtowns, whether it's my students in creating spaces or Kiana, the stuff that you do with the Loop Alliance, we're memory creators. We have to create these experiences to create that lasting memory, because I guarantee those are the stories that people tell.
And I would also add on to that, David, that it definitely draws a local audience, but I would even argue that it can draw an international audience. I mean, when I went to Barcelona, Las Ramblas is where we wanted to spend time. I mean, people do want to be in these large pedestrian spaces. People don't want to go on a vacation and then hang out where there's a bunch of automobile traffic. So I think that there's ways to kind of look forward in terms of how this can also be used as a tourist draw.
Absolutely.
Because we definitely have tourists that were like, I've never been to the city of Chicago, and I walked out and I found this, and this is amazing. And so it's an extra.
Yeah,
bonus.
and we can't forget about Instagram and the way that things are shared today, right? Like it's instantaneous. The positive and the negative memories are shared immediately. And so that is obviously was a big part in your strategy, Kiana, right? As far as how to encourage social media sharing and impressions, to kind of prove that a event is successful based on those impressions. Kiana, one more question on data collection. So do you think the work the CLA has done, events data collection, speaks to a shift from a weekday to a weekend entertainment district? We're seeing higher pedestrian counts on the weekends. Are people tired of working from home and escaping their downtown to a compelling downtown? Remember, we've talked before about the CBD, the Central Business District, shifting to the CSD, the Central Social District. What do you think about the data that you're seeing in the organization, Kiana, and what's your opinion on that?
I mean, I definitely think there's a change and a shift. I think it's both and it's all. I think it's downtowns are uniquely situated as a place people can come together, and all the things we do when we come together are included in that umbrella. So I do still think that we're going to see more of a growth in people coming back down for office. There's always going to be people who like or want to work from home, or maybe people who want to work remotely all the time, and some people who want to be in the office all the time. There's a large amount of people who really prefer some sort of hybrid experience, it seems. So I think that that's going to continue to grow. But in terms of the social experiences, the arts and culture, the leisure, the other opportunities to transform what our downtowns look like, I think that those opportunities are endless and are going to continue to draw people back. There's just yeah, I think it's all of the above. Did that answer? I don't know if that
I
answered that
love
question.
your slide, and maybe you want to put it back up if it's not too much trouble.
No, I totally can.
That shows it takes the pressure off the office, where you list the like 10 different things that you're targeting. Because we've got to flip the script. If office is at 43%, one of the questions was, will it ever get back to 80 or 100%? I don't know if it should. Right? Like when you look at this, let's take the pressure off the office. And there was a question too about how do you, can you speak about like the energy level within the business owners and how it just doesn't feel like it's getting back? I think we need to change the conversation and begin to sell more of the assets of downtown than just a business district. But it's a theater destination, right? The theaters are alive and well. The residential, people are living downtown more than ever before. In fact, the rent numbers are through the roof as far as how they're going up because there's such a demand. The leisure, the fact that you can rent a kayak and go kayaking on the Chicago River, again, in this amazing memory space of skyscrapers around you. The 50,000 college students, let's take the pressure off the office and realize that if we kind of look to fire on all cylinders, I think our downtown, we very easily by the end of the year could proclaim as alive and well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think there's still more growth to be seen in the office space before we say, oh, that's it. That's the amount of office workers that are coming back. I think there's still a lot of major sectors where they're not back in the way that I think they eventually will be. But I definitely think that all these other sectors, I mean, if, like I said, even if you just think of tourism numbers, if in the like Chicagoland area, there's about 7 million people, or I don't have the most recent data, but you know, it's around there. But our tourist numbers pre-COVID were 60 million, then the larger folks that you actually can appeal to bring to a specific attraction, all the local attractions know that really appealing to the tourists is part of that. But even just the local folks, I used to work downtown 5 days a week. And do we want to return to 40 to 60 plus hour days downtown? Then on the weekends, when my husband or my kid would say, let's go to Millennium Park or whatever, I'd say like, oh, do I really want to commute back downtown? I've been there all week. Can we do something locally? Now I'm down here 3 days a week, and I'm coming more on the weekends than I was before because I actually want to come down and enjoy the other amenities that the city has to offer. So I think a lot of people are experiencing that. And the days that they are downtown, the days that I am downtown, I'm also more likely to stay late and do things downtown because I'm back in other neighborhoods more, you know, on the other 4 days a week. So I don't feel like, oh, I've been here, you know, when you're downtown 40, 60 plus hours a week, sorry, this is a United States problem. Many on the call are like, what are you talking about? We're pretty good at keeping our hours less here, but when you're downtown that much, then you want to as soon as the workday is done, get home to your family. But when I'm not down in the office as much on, after work, then if there's an event at a local organization, I'm much more likely to go do that because I'm not getting so many of my hours sucked out by just being in this space already.
I love that. And that's such a great thing to end on. And let me just say that the redefining of our downtown, both from the items that are on the screen, but also the hours of engagement is really stunning. I remember when I started my career 25 plus years ago, there wasn't a restaurant open in the Loop after 5 p.m., right? Because everyone left. But Kiana, the world you're painting is actually of a more 24/7 downtown because you've taken the pressure off of the 9 to 5 workday Monday through Friday and expanded the opportunity for experience by distributing it through the week. I think that's a beautiful way to talk about it. Kiana, anything you want to say to wrap up?
I would just add, David, that your students' perceptions of downtown were really inspiring, and I'm sort of embarrassed and excited that because we don't even think about it, there are things that aren't on here. This more not-for-profit, the profit and social services sector. This is something we do at Chicago Loop Alliance at the Harold Washington Library Center. We meet with certain communities and people who need social services, and we're sort of sidelined to like a little area in the library where these people can come up and get little pamphlets. But yeah, what if there was really more intentional ways to think about these other social services and other not-for-profit and arts and culture and other things that you mentioned, just foster, we certainly need more, at least in this downtown, more options for education and daycare for children, foster care, things like that. So there's even other sectors that aren't even on this slide that we could be thinking about with how we
Well, I think the students were
revitalize.
inspired, as my final comment, I think the students were inspired by the ease of access into the Loop.
Mhm.
So some of those social services that have been cleansed out of the downtown because it didn't fit within the white collar business district were then placed in an area that was actually difficult to get to. It was a train and a bus transfer, right? So imagine, so for any of you on the call, take a fresh look at the assets and the amenities of the space that you're looking to do. And in the city of Chicago, you cannot get more accessible by all income levels than the Loop. Every train line runs through the Loop. So from every corner of the city, and broaden that with Amtrak and Metra of the metropolitan area, can get to the Loop. So when you begin to relook at the city like that, what are the amenities that we want to have in a downtown? And bringing your kids on the weekend, I enjoy the same thing, right? Like it's just that the city has some amenities. The Harold Washington Children's Library is one of the best in the country. Millennium Park, Maggie Daley Park, the theater,
Riverwalk.
the Riverwalk, and work. So what if we flip the script and the Loop is a place to work, but it's a place for all this other stuff.
And to live.
And to live. So with all that, hopefully we've sparked some ideas, some conversations, some thinking about your local cities. We would love to continue the conversation. You can get us both on LinkedIn. There was a QR code to my student's book. Please take a look and give comment on that. We put a link to the Loop Alliance Sundays on State. We thank you for your time. Kiana?
Thank you so much for making the time. I'm accessible. Feel free to reach out to me anywhere if you have questions. I'd love to hear more about some things that you all are working on in your downtown. So if anyone wants to reach out and share any similar projects or something totally different, I'm very fascinated and interested in what's going on in other cities and countries.
Inspiration.
And to those of you,
inspiration builds inspiration. Let's hear what you're doing too.
And thank you for those who joined live. And I know many from other folks in different countries and different time zones are going to be watching the recording. Thank you all for taking the time to talk about the future of our downtowns.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great day.